With 20,000 illegal migrants crossing the Channel already this year, with over 800 recorded on one day last week, which is a record, and with the government committing to welcome many thousands of Afghan refugees following the Allied withdrawal from Afghanistan, should the public have more of a say on UK immigration policy? Specifically, should there be a referendum on immigration in this country? This is the remarkable and provocative suggestion of Benjamin Loughnane, who is a research fellow at the Bow Group, a conservative think tank, and alongside him, Daniel Pryor from the pro-free market Adam Smith Institute. Benjamin, we'll start with you. What a fascinating idea. Although, do you think the country could stomach another referendum?
Oh, no, I'm not sure it could. I think referendums are definitely a way of pulling up the ground on politics, but that's the whole point, really, isn't it? It's about saying there is a point where an issue becomes so important, so palpable, and such a huge thing among the people, and with Westminster not really listening, you need to give people a voice. They need to be able to say, well, we've had enough, it's time to actually talk about this, it's time to actually put our opinions across, and, you know, with Brexit, it was the same thing. There was a feeling across the country. People had this sense of we're not happy with the EU, we don't want to be a part of it. And it was only when we had a referendum that the government started to listen. And then they took ownership of it. They then said, brilliant, we know what the people want, and we are going to mirror that, and we are going to have an 80-seat majority off the back of it. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about saying this is what's going to take you to electoral victory for the government. Listen to the people.
When it comes to referenda, of course, the devil is in the detail, isn't it, Benjamin? And of course, the wording. So, you know, how might you phrase it? Would it be the suggestion of a cap? Would it be to end migration into the UK? How might this conversation be framed?
Well, there's many ways of looking at it. There's qualitative, quantitative, it could be numbers, it could be the type, it could be where it's from, it could be what it's for, etc. Really, it's about actually just talking about the issue. The main thing that a referendum does is it forces people to have a conversation on a national level. So when it was Brexit, it was, you know, such a huge issue, Brexit, the EU. It covers every area of our policy. The European Union was every area of our law, etc. But it was about saying we need to have this conversation, we need to have this debate, this needs to be what people are thinking about and talking about and speaking about. And the question really isn't the thing that matters. It's not in or out like it was with the EU, it's not yes or no like it would be with this. It's about having that conversation, having that process where the entire country comes together, discusses an issue and makes a decision.
Now, Daniel Pryor, many people in this country, many people watching this programme, I would venture, don't feel heard with their concerns about levels of migration into the UK. Perhaps a referendum would fix that.
Well, I certainly think that there's a strong case for having a national conversation about that. I don't think that a referendum is the way to do it. We have a representative democracy in this country to decide on policy issues like this, and I think the referendums, as they were in the case of Brexit, should be reserved for more constitutional questions. And as you mentioned yourself, it's also lacking definition. We can't have a simple yes or no question. Or if we did, then it wouldn't capture the way that people's views on immigration in the UK are complex. Asking a question about something like, say, overall numbers wouldn't address people's preferences on how we select which migrants come into the UK or how we treat refugees, for example. But I do think it's worth noting that if we were to have one, I actually think the outcome would surprise some people, especially from the side of this debate that's more sceptical of migration. If you look at overall attitudes towards migration in the UK, they tend to be or come out as net positive, and they've been trending that way certainly for the past decade or so, despite Brexit, or perhaps because of it, as people feel more in control of their borders. And when it comes to current hot button immigration issues, we actually see significant support for things like free movement with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, greater access for Hong Kong, British national overseas passport holders, and to some extent even support for helping Afghan refugees who are fleeing from the Taliban. So I think if we were to have a referendum on any number of different questions related to migration, the pro-migration side might have quite a good shot of it. I don't want one, but I do think that there's a possibility that they'd win.
Benjamin?
No, not at all. There's even net support actually among immigrants themselves in this country for lower migration, because they recognise the fact that the reason they come to this country are for certain benefits which are diminished by the vast scale of mass migration. The current numbers, the figures that we're seeing of 700,000 plus people coming in every year, net figure of over 300,000, is an unsustainable figure for a country of our size and our resources. So even immigrants themselves come here and they say, we actually want to reduce the amount. We want to come in, we want our families to come in, but we don't want the whole world coming here. So I don't think it is as clear-cut as you think it is. I don't think you'd win the referendum. And if you do think you'd win a referendum on it, then I'll challenge you to one. And if you really think you'll win it, then you'll say yes.
No, I don't think I would say yes, because it's not about whether I'd win or not. It's more to do with the fact whether I think deciding questions like immigration. I mean, I wouldn't have a referendum on how many tractors the UK produced, for example. So I don't see why a kind of conservative think tank would support a referendum on how many immigrants we should take in every year.
I mean, Daniel, let's look at the economics of this. Do people coming into this country, migrants into the UK, generate economic growth, or do they cost the economy?
Well, it depends on the specific economic question. So migration in general tends to boost productivity. Immigrants overall, at least, it depends on certain subgroups, but they tend to subsidise the rest of us by paying more in than they take out, and also tackling some of that post-COVID debt that I think everyone's concerned about. They also help to address skill shortages as well, especially in sectors that simply can't afford to raise wages if they want their businesses to continue to exist. And on this kind of specific question of numbers, because I understand this is, a really important point for a lot of people. If we put this in the kind of context of the Afghan refugee debate, I think we could be much more generous than we have been historically in the case of, say, Ugandans in the 1970s. The current proposals for 5,000 Afghan refugees in the first year is a very small number. And for the other 15,000 that we said we'd resettle in the years following, it's not much good to kind of sit there in a queue when the Taliban is knocking at your door. And the idea that we don't have space in this country, in my opinion at least, comes across as clearly ridiculous. Nobody bats an eyelid when 50,000 babies are born in this country every month, and those babies don't pay taxes for another 16 years, unlike most working age refugees. If we actually let them work, that is, which at the moment, sadly, we don't tend to do.
Well, Daniel, we have land, for sure. I mean, we don't have a capacious amount of land, but, well over 85% of the UK is actually rural, and there's potential for development. And I think in a different conversation, we should be building as many new homes as possible for the people already here. But the issue you've got is access to healthcare. GP surgeries, school places. These are big concerns of many people in many communities.
Yeah, and I think they're very understandable ones. Just to take those in turn, if you look at specifically the NHS and the research that's been done on the impact of migration, it seems like there's not much impact on, say, NHS waiting times either way. And the reason is that whilst it's true you have more migrants demanding the NHS's services, whatever they may be, GP appointments, etc., they also disproportionately tend to work in the NHS as well. So these two effects kind of cancel each other out in a way where there's some pressure on infrastructure, but also migration tends to help some of these infrastructure issues as well. The same tends to be true when it comes to schools to a slightly different extent. And there's no evidence to suggest that, say, migrants with English as their second language affect the attainment of native students. And just to be clear, nobody, not even the kind of pro-migration side of the debate that I'm on, nobody's saying we should let everyone in. And they don't want to all come here anyway. The vast majority of Afghan refugees, for example, to date at least, are in Pakistan and Iran. We're not advocating for completely opening the drawbridge and letting everyone in at once and pressing that big red button. What we're saying is that in general, the economic evidence tends to show that migration has a number of benefits, boosting productivity, subsidizing the rest of us through taxation, etc. And the costs, whilst they do exist, I think can be mitigated if we're sensible about this.
And it's interesting, isn't it, Benjamin, because Germany, I was reading, are in long-term decline when it comes to the size of their population. The actual population of Germany is expected to shrink considerably in the next 3 decades. And the UK is expected to grow in the size of its population. And many economists make a correlation between the size of the population and also the age of its population and its economic growth. And many people expect Britain not just to go past France economically, but potentially catch Germany in the years ahead, partly because of the size of our population.
Absolutely, but GDP isn't the only question. We've also got quality of life. We are quite a small nation and population density is quite high, and there are strains on things like housing. But on the issue of the economy, which Daniel brought up, the cost of immigration to this country is about 4.3 billion a year. That's the net figure. So it costs far more than what we gain from whatever benefits we gain from migration. The key issue here really is things like housing and resources, the NHS, etc. We can't actually cope for the existing population at the moment. So how can we continue to have an increase in the population of almost 500,000 every year? We're at a point now where we need to say there is a number which is sustainable and there is a number which is not sustainable, and currently we're in the unsustainable territory.
I mean, do you think, Benjamin, that's where we need to be, is to establish a figure, a number per year which is palatable to the British people?
Well, absolutely, quantity is part of it, but quality is too. I mean, we also need to say, well, we need to say this is the figure that we need to reach, and also we need to make sure that those people coming in who fit into that figure are the absolute best of the best. And I would have no problem with that. If we had the absolute best of the best with a cap that we had, which we set, where we said this is the absolute limit every year, there'd be no problems.
Well, we know, don't we, that Theresa May stuck to her guns, suggesting that the annual net migration could be in the tens of thousands. That never came close to happening.
No, it wasn't just Theresa May either. It was David Cameron 2010, Theresa May Cameron 2015, Theresa May 2017. It was changed under Boris to reduce immigration overall. That was a rewording which took out any numbers. It was deliberately to evade any sort of being held to account over a particular figure. But basically, the government don't have the cojones to say we're going to promise more immigration, we're going to promise an increase in immigration, or we're going to promise the sustained levels of immigration. They always promise to reduce and then break that promise. Why is that? Because people don't actually want increased migration. What the people want is a reduction. They want it down to a sensible level where it is sustainable. Unfortunately, the government don't want to do it. There are many reasons for this, part of which is that it benefits big businesses to have a huge scale of migration because you get cheap labour and you have you corner the market, as it were, on labour. So
and that's why they were so against Brexit, of course.
Absolutely, it's the same thing. It's you get cheap labour, constant influx. If people say, oh, I'm sick of this, I'm sick of being underpaid and overworked, they leave, but more people are coming in. You have that constant flow and nothing really gets done. It also stops things like innovation and automation, where you have that influx of labour consistently. It prevents us from actually striving and achieving things that we would have to achieve if we were in a situation where we could say, this is our labour force, this is what we can pay them, this is what we need to pay them, this is what's right, and this is how we need to innovate. Unfortunately, we have mass migration, which prevents us from treating people fairly or innovating.
However, would, Benjamin, a cap on the numbers coming into the UK be open to the accusation of Britain being a nasty country, an uncaring, unempathetic country, and a racist country?
No, not at all. I don't think so. I think no one could possibly say that we've been the most generous country in the world. For a small island nation to continue to take in figures of migration which are so high over the past 50 or so years, particularly in the past 30 years since 1997, it would be, I think, inaccurate to say that we are uncharitable.
Final words to you, Daniel?
Yeah, just picking up on a couple of things that was said there. On the impact of migration on wages, it's simply not true that migration drives down wages in any significant way whatsoever. The kind of worst case scenario for low paid workers is around a penny an hour in the most pessimistic estimates. And in general, it tends to drive people's wages up quite significantly. On the second point about this whole idea of, well, maybe we should set an overall numbers target again, as Theresa May promised to do. You know, me and Ben both work for think tanks that are on the centre-right. We may obviously have very different ideas about migration, but the thing that springs to mind for me is surely those of us who are on the centre-right should be a bit sceptical about Whitehall bureaucrats setting production quotas and targets in a centrally planned way, as opposed to leaving those decisions, to some extent at least, up to businesses who actually know what they need in terms of employment, in terms of specific skills that maybe they can't find in the UK, for example. So those are my kind of concerns when it comes to people, especially on the right of politics, who think that the government is extremely good at deciding what British businesses need and who they should hire.
My profound thanks. A very constructive conversation. Benjamin Loughnane is a research fellow at the Bow Group, a conservative think tank, and Daniel Pryor from the pro-free market Adam Smith Institute.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.